Hey team, this is Ryan with Ryan School of Business. I wanted to film today out at a local beach here in Santa Barbara, Arroyo Burro Beach. Give you a view here. Locals here, we call this Hendry's Beach. You get a view from where I am. I wanted to talk today about inflation. We're all feeling right now. And take it from the perspective of a geopolitical, cultural, and financial side, bringing a perspective that I believe is somewhat unusual. I don't always hear from this perspective. But today, with regard to inflation, I felt like I wanted to make this video because I hear a lot of misinformation, sometimes very convincing in how it's presented, but it's not necessarily accurate or very good in terms of planning. So today I wanted to bring a perspective from my day-to-day living as an instructor and as a professor, as well as a former investment banker, as a small business owner, and put all these perspectives together, because I do believe if we have a structured approach and we apply critical thinking skills to it, we can make a better judgment based on the circumstances we face. And the purpose with regards to my approach and really sharing with students that I do daily, as well as I go through sometimes grocery store lines and I start talking economics and finance, people want to listen. But my perspective is really to help you utilize the knowledge and the structure to make your life better, to free up more time. So for me, as young as I was, I'd say 16 years old when I started investing and buying stocks through a Merrill Lynch investment fund for young people, it's always been about how it can lead to something. And for me, at that age, when I was young, my target car for the purposes of making some money was one of two things. It was either a red Fiat convertible, like a Fiat Spider, or a Firebird. I ended up with the Firebird, and after making money in the markets and saving and planning. So for me, it's always been about trying to have a purpose for it. So with this channel, and really what my objective is, in talking with students and just finding what has resonated, what has worked for them, and as you listen, I want to hear your thoughts. How does this impact you? How can I help? What subjects would you like to talk about? But I wanted to start off looking at inflation, because we're at an unusual time, at least not something we faced for maybe 50 years or so. But I see it manifest, and I want you guys to start thinking about this as you go through your life. And as we make these observations, as we learn to become better analysts and critical thinkers, I think we can plan better and have a better, more purposeful life. So in the end, that's always the objective. And there are ways to benefit and look at these opportunities, which can sometimes seem daunting. But if we're well positioned, we can get through it. And in our next video, when we look at investments and portfolios, I'll talk about some of those items. And I'll just say this much. There are times when just maintaining what you have, holding on to what you have, not losing too much, are wins. But that's for the next video. But today, when we look at inflation, I want to start with a story. Because in late November of 2021, I remember talking to my wife and was feeling pretty good about how our tech portfolio had done and different investments that we had put together. And I was in a fund which is very well diversified in some of the best tech companies in North America and really the world to a large part. And I think the fund was up about 90% year to date or something like that. It had invested in 300-400 different companies. So the risk-adjusted return was amazing, really, for that kind of low risk, high return. Very unusual. But in that time, I was talking with my wife and noted that, I'm feeling pretty good about this. And she said, Rye, you probably ought to sell that. That's a big return. That's a lot. And in long story short, I did listen. A very wise decision in many ways. And then I remember probably 6 or 7 months later, after that fund was down quite a bit, it would have been kind of a bad ride down. I remember that we had purchased some ground beef and frozen it from a while back. I don't know if it was a good deal, a good price, but just sort of a little forward thinking. And my wife had suggested, so we bought a bunch of meat. And I ended up getting it out and looking at it, and I noted that the purchase price then, because the sticker was still on it, and I happened to have been in a grocery store around the same time, and looking at it, I joked and I said, honey, the portfolio that we had, I'm glad we sold it because it's down quite a bit. But the beef that you suggested we freeze is actually the best performing asset that we have. And it was up around 100%. So the ground beef had done better than the stock portfolio. Certainly had done better in a downturn. And as this went on, then I started to notice some other things with prices going up. And my very old used Mercedes, I started to look at some of the price points on it. And 6 months later, the best performing asset that I had was my old Mercedes, because used car prices had surged. And it outperformed everything else, better even than the meat. So I'm just saying we're in unprecedented times. But it leads me to talking about inflation at this time, because what's happened is there are really a few varieties of it, and I want to talk about them and define what they are a bit. And with that, then sort of look at what I think we're facing and how to prepare. But first of all, we have something called demand pull inflation, where the demand for something rises relative to everything else. It pulls up the price of something. So due to an increase in demand for whatever reason, whatever variable, whatever happens, it leads to demand rising relative to everything else. When that happens, it could be shifting down to a certain thing, or something becomes more fashionable, favorable, whatever it is, you get demand pull inflation. And that will cause prices to rise. The other side of the inflation equation occurs on the other side with something called supply shock, where the supply of something and the intersection between supply and demand gets impacted because the supply is shocked, as in reduced. Maybe there's an embargo, maybe there's a shortage, maybe there's a weather issue. We can think about it with, say, gasoline stocks or crude oil or something like that. There's a supply shock. The supply is reduced. When this happens, for markets to clear at the price where both buyer and seller are willing to transact, so we bring economics to the front, when the supply is suddenly reduced relative to everything else, the prices must rise to clear the market. It's a market clearing price. Whenever demand or supply are altered, it will affect the price, and the price is the clearing mechanism in this regard. So when that happens, supply shock or demand pull, we're getting a rise in price. And so we generally observe that we need more currency units, or dollars in our case, to buy something. So relative to that thing, we need more currency units or dollars, if you want to look at it that way. So the price goes up, we describe it as inflation. Then thirdly, there's another form of inflation that occurs, and that's when the money supply is increased. So it's a monetary expansion inflation. Think about this. I've often mentioned this with my students, and we talk about the game of Monopoly. But let's say I were the banker and we're playing a game of Monopoly, and all the money is distributed, and we're purchasing units, and we're going forward with our game. Well, then let's say that I purchase another Monopoly game, and I take the cash out of that game, and I introduce it into my new game. The existing game that I had, I infuse more capital. I put more cash in. I double the money supply, if you will. I distribute it to the players. And once that happens, I have the same real estate. I have the same economy, if you will, but a lot more money. So whereas before, if we had a market, maybe for Park Place or something like that, it is what it is. There's a certain demand for it. The market drives it. When there's more money, it gives more purchasing power in currency units. It pushes the prices up. So as money supply increases dramatically, and there's some more factors to this, but I'm keeping it simple. But as the money supply increases, it will drive up prices. The reason I went in this order, demand pull, supply shock, and monetary supply, is because all three of these factors are playing out right now, and it's why we see certain items up so much in the last couple years. All three are at work. We had supply shock, we had demand pull as people started to demand certain items, they started to stock up, they sense a problem, they buy more food, they buy more real estate, they buy whatever it is. The supply has been limited or curtailed or shortened or taken off the market, plus an infusion of a lot of cash all at once. And we're in this situation now, and it's manifests as higher prices and significant inflation, which then also impacts other parts of the equation, including stock market, real estate market, cryptos, etc. So I want you to pay attention the next time you go out and notice with regard to inflation what's happening with prices. So as we continue with our analysis and we dig a little deeper regarding the topic of inflation, I've seen it manifest in some other ways, and you may have as well. When it becomes more of a persistent problem and the price increases become more noticeable, some of the things you'll notice will be the following. There's the traditional price increase that we've noted where a given item is exactly the same and the price goes up. We understand that traditional inflation. But I've also seen some manifestation of what I will just say is shrinkflation, where in this case, let's say it's a bag of potato chips. Well, historically, the bag size was the same. Maybe even the price stays the same. But instead of it having, say, 32 ounces or 16 ounces, instead of 32, it might have 28 ounces. Instead of 16, it may have 13 and a half or something like that. I've seen some very strange levels of measurement on some things as they're shrunk in size. So the bag size or the container size stays the same, and the price might even stay the same, but the content shrinks. So it's shrinkflation would be the way we would look at that. Sometimes you get shrinkflation as well as a modest price rise, but they're muting it somewhat or making it more or less noticeable. So you're not going to perhaps change your purchase decision. But most of the time, it seems to me that the price stays about the same, but the size shrinks. Shrinkflation. But there's also another one, and that is what I call as skimpflation, where in this case, the price may stay the same, the quantity may even stay the same, but the quality goes down. So there's skimping. It may be historically in the item you get raw organic honey, or you get pure vanilla, but instead they shift out, keeping the price the same, the size the same, but they go to an imitation. So you don't get the pure vanilla. You don't get the pure honey. You get some imitations and things like that, and that's skimpflation. So that's another way where we're seeing these price increases driving certain behavior changes. And this is, in many ways, I'm seeing regular inflation, shrinkflation, and skimpflation all sort of manifesting at the store, or as we purchase things, goods and services are affected as well. So again, some of the drivers impacting the geopolitical situation, I talk with students in many countries. Sometimes I have students out of, say, 20 in my class, I might have 13, 14 different countries. Europe, South America, Asia, frequently. And we're seeing it happen in different ways. We're also seeing some impact with inflation that is not necessarily equally shared. In some places it's worse than others because of the supply-demand equations playing out. But as you go out, I want you to pay attention to price levels, size levels of say, packaging and things like that. See the different manifestations of inflation as we go out. I'd love to have your comments. I'd love to have your thoughts on this and how we can continue this discussion, because it does matter and the purchase decisions are affected. In the end, what I want is that we find effective ways with our spending so we can save more and we can invest more, which ultimately leads to more free time doing the things we want, having the ability to be more deliberate in our life. So with me, I really want to bring together economics and finance, but where it covers and it comes into our life so that we can have more freedom, we can have more deliberateness of our lives. That does it for this episode. I'd love your comments. Please hit the like, please subscribe. I'll see you next time.